Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Jim K. Ford Sens Nation Podcast, and we are coming at you moments after the Senators went right into Chicago against the 32nd place Blackhawks, the dead last team in the NHL, and, they lost to them. Yeah, lost 3-2, giving up a goal with under 2 minutes to go, and it's been an interesting week, Greg, really, when you think about it, because the 28th place Ottawa Senators, it's weird, they ended up playing 3 games in a row against teams that were lower in the standings than them. It kind of reminded me of a relegation tournament, and the Sens didn't fare very well. Columbus, Anaheim, Chicago, and they only end up with 2 of a possible 6 points. I think it's pretty clear to say that the defensive details, while they were working along pretty nicely there for a while, they seem to forget them against the lesser teams. Anyway, how are you today, Greg?
I'm good, Steve. I'm very good. Thank you. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. The relegation tournament, the Senators have now been relegated. It was just abysmal. Like they looked like the October Ottawa Senators, lost. They were lost in their own zone again. Like, and they gave up so few chances, so few shots. Everything looked okay in that sense, but then the goals, yet again, a bad goal that a goalie should have stopped, and probably one, if not two, that defensively they were just far too passive. And then where's the offense? It's the Chicago Blackhawks, and you can only manage 2 goals. That's a bit of a question mark for me too.
Yeah. It's just frustrating that you think lessons are getting learned every single season. This is the thing about young teams. And we've been watching this young team for a long time, but it was a really young team. But it doesn't seem to be getting the lessons through. How much heartache, how much sting of losses like today's in Chicago, how much of that do you have to endure before you really, really become a mature, grown-up team and start or stop? You get a little bit of success in a 4-game win streak. Oh, look at these lousy teams are going to be playing here. Hey, you're still only the 28th place team in the NHL. Yes, these teams are below you, but you have no business taking anybody lightly, and yet it almost seems like that's exactly the case.
Correct. We've said it before. You earn the right to be overconfident. I long for the day when this team is in the top 10 of the league and they lose a game like this to Chicago, and we can just say, yeah, they took them lightly. It's lowly Chicago. They took them lightly. But there's just no excuse for it. There's no excuse for not bearing down and getting 2 points when they're right there. Well, really, it's 4 points. Anaheim was that was a terrible hockey game. This game, they were a little better against Chicago, but still, just I don't know. The old adage is just because it's been taught doesn't mean it's been learned. And I think that the learning process sometimes, with this group anyway, it seems to take a little longer to sink in. We think how many times have we discussed, have they turned a corner? I know we've opened shows with that before. When they've won 3 out of 4, have they turned a corner? Well, they turn a corner, but unfortunately, there's another corner up ahead. It's a square building, and they just keep turning and turning and turning, and they just never seem to get on a straight line going up continually up in their performance and in the standings.
I believe this young team really, loves the guys in the room. I think that's a team, and maybe you could even argue that throughout the DJ Smith years that a bit of a country club atmosphere had set in, but I still think this is a really talented group. There's probably a little bit too much of certain ingredients, and they lack ingredients in other places. There's a lot of sameness going on right now, both up front and on the blue line. Goaltending needs to be better. But my point is that if this team loves itself loves each other as much as I think they do, and they want to keep the core together, they're not giving Steve Staios any reason to do that. Like, Staios may have been thinking with the deadline looming, okay, you're on a nice 4-game win streak. Maybe these guys are finally figuring things out, and then you go and do this. I think Staios is wide open for business, and I do think he's going to do something, at least one move that will shock this team, that will rattle them, where one of the core guys I think is going to end up going out the door.
It might not be a bad idea, right, to have that that objective right now. If you're Steve Staios, if you're Dave Poulin, sitting there going, maybe we need to really shock these guys. Maybe we need to put a little fear of God in them. Maybe we really
Yeah.
do need to move one of the. It's probably what, 6 or 7. It might even be as many as 8 guys that you would think would be completely untouchable. Maybe it is time to move one of those guys. I'm not sure. I know where you stand on this. So I know which defenseman you'd like to move. Um, but yeah, maybe that's what it's going to take. Maybe it's a Shabbat. Maybe it's a Norris. Maybe it's even Drake Batherson. One of these guys is going to get the shock of his life, and it may be just what the doctor ordered for this group of players.
I think the obvious ones, you're looking at Tarasenko or Kubalik just contractually, and the fact that they've probably got enough of that type of player up front to get away with, Pinto's return. That's you're in a situation now where you got a lot of good stuff up front in your top six, and you can get away, I think, without Tarasenko or Kubalik. And I know Tarasenko's got a no trade clause, but I think he might be open to it. He just fired his agent very close to the deadline, so he's obviously anticipating something. But in both of those cases, I really feel like their money, if you're thinking about re-signing them, their money, I think, would be better spent on assets that you need, ingredients to the Stanley Cup recipe that you lack right now.
Well, a couple of guys making what they're paying Tarasenko $5 million, 2 glue guys at $2.5 million each, or one at 3 and one at 2, like 2 glue guys, 2 good citizens, outstanding veteran players, 200-foot guys, everything we've talked about, pros.
Yeah.
2 guys to fit that sort of role that are a little better than guys that are in those roles now. Like, that's basically what Kastelik is. That's basically what Parker Kelly is. They are the future pros pro. They're just not there yet. Do you get an upgrade on those 2 guys and maybe somebody with a little more offensive flair than those 2 guys? You get 1 or 2 of those type players. That's what we know what Steve Staios is looking for. The question is that player available somewhere out there for them to pick up at a don't forget they're up against the cap too. It's not just trying to fit the right guy and find the right player, but it's also trying to find the right dollar amount to make him fit, to help him fit into the current structure here with the Senators. So that's what leads us to talking about maybe it's one of the big money guys who has to go, because it frees up some money. It sends the message like we've talked about, and it gives you an opportunity to fill in with a different type of player is what you're looking for.
Yeah, and on the blue line, meanwhile, and yes, you're right. I mean, I'm critical of Thomas Chabot. I've kind of lost it with Thomas Chabot on a number of occasions here on the podcast. At $8 million, I just expect a lot more than pond hockey, poke checking, lack of defensive awareness, lack of any sort of urgency in his own
Urgency.
zone. I just don't see any of that from this guy. And watching him on the winning goal against Chicago, watching him in the fourth goal against Anaheim, people get really mad at me when I bring up Thomas Chabot. I don't take any pleasure in criticizing the player, but that's just where I'm at with him. And I think with the trade deadline looming, as is his no trade or his modified no trade clause, which is coming up in the summer, if Steve Staios maybe looking at it the same way, and he's looking at it objectively too. He's not, he might be looking at Eric Brandstrom. That's a good example of a player. He's going to be an RFA, and he might be out the door as well because, and you've been talking about him for a while as a pretty expendable. He's a good example because Pierre Dorion was hesitant to move that guy, and probably some other guys that he was involved with bringing into the organization. Well, he's gone now, and now Steve Staios is looking at things in a balanced, objective, no connection to these players type of way. And if he's in the mode of, okay, I'm not that big a Chabot fan. I mean, compare them as players. Steve Staios as a player, you couldn't pick a more polar opposite defenseman than Thomas Chabot to Steve Staios. So there's a part of me that thinks that maybe he's not that, but we'll see. But if he is thinking in those terms, I'm not saying he is, but if he is, Chabot's never going to be more easy to trade than he is between now and the trade deadline. And with that $8 million, he's got 4 more years at $8 million. You can, again, like I keep saying, you can take something. Chabot would be another example of a kind of player they've got more than enough of. Maybe that's where they maybe are most loaded with puck moving, non-physical defensemen. They're covered. especially on the left side. So even if you love
Yeah.
Shabbat, there's still a merit to the idea of moving him out for something you need in your Stanley Cup recipe.
The problem being the $8 million. Like, who out there has got room to take on that sort of a contract? It's not going to be a contending team. I don't see it. Like, would Edmonton like a player like Thomas Chabot? Probably, but they can't afford it. They don't have room in the salary cap, and I don't know that what they would be able to offer up to get back in return. So it comes down to how much of Shabbat's contract are the Senators willing to eat? Maybe they might have to retain a bit of salary, or are they willing to take a bad contract back? Considering their cap situation, if you're moving out 8, then maybe you could take a bad contract back. Maybe you could. I don't know. It's gonna be math. There's gonna be math involved in this, Steve, in trying to move a Thomas Chabot, or even if it's Chikrin, same sort of thing. Chikrin obviously doesn't make as much money, but you're probably right in that between Chikrin, Chabot, and well, not you're probably you are right between Brandstrom, Chikrin, and Chabot. You've got a lot of the same guy. I've been maintaining all along. Brandstrom's done. We don't need him anymore. You can move on from him, but he's not going to get you a big return. So if you really want to make that splash, I like your idea, Steve, that you let off with here. I like your idea of maybe putting a shock into the players, maybe showing them, hey, this really is a business, and we do mean business, and we're serious here. And let's wake up, everybody. And since you didn't wake up, we've moved one of your best buds. I really like your idea.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I think you got a case of it's $8 million, or if you're looking at another expensive player, it's something you have enough of. So maybe there's a team out there that has, a wealth of things that the Sens need, like a defensive defenseman that's going to knock guys around, that maybe isn't the best puck mover, but really complements a puck mover. Just try and work from other people's areas of strength. They have a surplus of that. We need that. We'll bring that guy in and take on his money. You can have Chabot and his money, and you need a power play quarterback. That's probably the kind of deal that it would have to be to make something like that work at the deadline. And of course, it's also something you could look at again in the summertime. But Chabot is not. It's not really a deal breaker. This no movement or this no trade clause, because it is a modified one. So it's the standard. He can submit 10 teams. Well, that still gives you 21 teams to work with. So not the end of the road either if they have to, go beyond this summer. It's not as hard a deadline as some have presented.
So how do you feel about Tarasenko and Kubalik then? You mentioned them off the top as being two guys that you'd look to jettison here just because contractually they're not signed for next year. And do you want to sign them? Do you want them back? And in the case of Kubalik, he wasn't Staios, didn't make that trade. That was a Pierre Dorion deal. What do you think you could even get for guys like that? Like I can't see much coming back for Kubalik. And there's chatter about if Sean Monahan gets you a first round pick, then Vladimir Tarasenko might be able to get your first round pick. If that's going to happen, it's going to be late on the day of the trade deadline. It's going to be after everybody's taken their shots and missed and still wants somebody, and maybe you can get a first for Tarasenko later. But
Yeah.
Kubalik, like what are you going to get for him? Like, could you even get a second? I don't know.
In the case of Kubalik, the biggest value you're getting back is access to the $2.5 million by not re-signing him. And if you get something for him at the deadline, like even like a third or a fourth rounder, then it's an asset. Because I just don't think it's just not again, they have enough of him. He's not a top 6 guy. He's certainly not a classic bottom 6 guy. So you just try and get the best you can for him. If it's not much, maybe you can get a second rounder. I think everybody be doing cartwheels about that, because the guy's been a healthy scratch
Yeah.
at times this year for the Sens. With Tarasenko, yeah, I think you could get a first rounder, but it's the same deal. You're also including in the deal, your compensation for a deal about Tarasenko is you get that $5 million back on your books effectively, and you can use that. That's between Tarasenko and Kubalik, you get $7.5 million back by not re-signing them as free agents, and that $7.5 million will go a long way to filling a need in another area where you are at a deficit.
And there's been a lot of talk lately about Kastelik too. Like, is this a guy
Yep.
that you're willing to move? I think basically the only reason that Kastelik is still in the lineup and playing is that Rourke Chartier is waiver exempt. If Rourke Chartier didn't have to, had to clear waivers, he probably would still be here, and Kastelik would be gone. I think Kastelik is probably a piece that they will be able to move easily for whatever, right? If they don't really care about what the return is, just moving a guy out because they see Chartier being in that place moving forward. I think Kastelik, you could probably trade him for a fifth tomorrow if you wanted to.
I think, not to be a jerk or anything, but I think Chartier did clear waivers to go to Belleville.
No. He's waiver exempt.
Really?
Well, maybe I'm
Are
wrong.
you sure?
No, I don't. I'm pretty sure.
I thought he was placed on. I thought he was placed on waivers and cleared.
Oh, maybe you're right. He was placed on waivers. Okay,
we'll cut
so
that
then
out.
the thinking. No, we don't need to cut that out.
All right.
I'm looking at it from the other way, as Kastelik would be claimed if you put him on waivers. Chartier, regardless of whether he has to be, whether he's waiver exempt or not, Chartier probably wouldn't be claimed. Kastelik, I think, would have been. But yeah, right. I'll agree with you that maybe Chartier did have to clear waivers.
As long as we're in this full dissection mode right now, we haven't even talked about the games really. Though I'm always hesitant to talk about the games here on the podcast, because by the time people are hearing the podcast, it's a day or two after the game, and another game is being played or about to be played, and so I'm going to kind of, I don't know. We'll talk about issues, but we're not going to do full game breakdowns anymore. I've made the decision on the fly here right now. We've just told you Chicago and Anaheim, the 32nd place team and the 30th place team came in and beat the Ottawa Senators, and nobody really wants a breakdown on that anyway. Maybe the games where they have a lot of fun and win big, we can get into that a little more. But one of the big things about Anaheim is the fact that the Anaheim game, but even more so Chicago, maybe both games. I really am skeptical that the Stanley Cup solution in goal is here right now. I really feel like, I don't know about Sogard or anything in the minors right now. That's all unproven. And Sogard he's looked sketchy in some games too. So I'm not sure exactly where we're at right now, but I don't know. I'm looking at Forsberg and I'm looking at Korpisalo, and I don't know if the Stanley Cup solution is there. Where are you on that?
I agree. I kind of I let Forsberg have it last show, didn't I? But in the case of Korpisalo, I'm still willing to hold out. Just the little piece of the body of work there when he was in LA, playing behind a really good defense, he put up some really good numbers. Now, is that to say that anybody could have put up those numbers? Maybe that's possible. It could have been anybody, but it was him. He left Columbus. Right. He went to LA last year late at the deadline, finished the season there, and did very well behind that defense. Some would say it kind of blew up when he got to Edmonton in the playoffs, but he showed he could play. So I'm still willing to hold out a little hope that if this team ever gets it straightened out and plays consistently well defensively, that I think Korpisalo can maybe be a solution here. I don't know that he's a number one guy on a Stanley Cup championship team. That's probably asking too much. But then again, with his contract, by the time this team's ready to compete for a Stanley Cup, is he still going to be here? Or will we be on to somebody else by then in what is the revolving door of Ottawa Senator goaltending?
Yeah, we both, I think everybody in Sens Nation has the same take on things. If you ask two questions of them, hey, in the last 5 years, what have you thought about the goaltending here? Or in the last 5 years, what have you thought of the team defense and their structure in their own end the last 5 years? I think the answer would be in both cases. I don't think a lot of either. I've been happy with either. So it's really hard to evaluate on both fronts. Is the defensive structure really that bad, or is it the goaltending? Or is the goaltending really that bad, or is the lack of defense happening in front of them? I don't envy Steve Staios trying to evaluate what's going on here exactly, because it may be both, but it could be one that's dragging the other along.
Okay, so what kind of players are you looking at? We didn't really discuss this pre-show, but I know that at one point we were high on the possibility of Adam Henrique a couple of years ago. He's a guy who's still available. I remember one time a while back I mentioned Kevin Labanc. I remember that about 2 years ago when San Jose was looking at what to do with a Kevin Labanc, and he kind of had a breakout. I read this week that he's kind of floundering in San Jose now, and a guy looking for a new place to play. are those are the types of players we're looking for. We mentioned a guy from the Islanders, didn't we? Talk about now here I go again, Steve. It's all
Don't
because of the
introduce
stroke.
stuff that you don't
It's
know.
all because of the stroke, right? The short term
Oh,
memory is gone. Cal Clutterbuck, was it Cal Clutterbuck that we talked about one day on the show here?
I want Cal Clutterbuck.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean
that's I think
that's the
that
type of guy.
yeah, physically robust, willing to use his physicality and to be a jerk.
Yeah,
That's the type of player I'm looking at. Like he's not going to help you offensively, but the Sens have lots of guys in their bottom six that aren't helping you offensively. I want a guy that's out there being a shift disturber. I need shift disturbers both up front and on the blue line. That would be one of my big asks right now. And the veteran component, that's another angle, and Clutterbuck fills that. I look at a guy in Calgary, since we're talking so much about Tanev, lots of rumors about him. I would even kick the tires on a guy like Blake Coleman. There's a
yep.
guy who can score. There's a guy who can be a buzzsaw out there for you. You need older guys that have been around, that see trends happening. They see the storm clouds coming in that locker room, and they nip that stuff in the bud. I think right now Brady Tkachuk, if he ended up in a new organization, would be a fantastic asset to that organization because he's seen now like nothing but misery. Generally speaking, there have been some good moments, but he's seen everything that can go wrong with an organization on and off the ice. So a guy that's been around the block a few times is a real asset to a team. So yeah, I mean those are the types of players.
Connor
And so
Brown.
veteran, so the veteran part, the physicality part, and maybe goaltending as well. Connor Brown, I would kick the tires on him because you can get him for almost nothing right now. Oiler fans are just sick to death of him. But
He's
I
doing
mean,
nothing.
maybe he lost a step after the knee
Yeah,
injury. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of him, but I'll sure take that Connor Brown from 2 years ago back here.
yeah. And I still like Travis Konechny, although now I don't think Philly's going to be moving him. But Travis
Right.
Konechny was always a guy I would have liked to have seen here too. That probably a little higher up the lineup and a higher up in the salary scale than the Senators are looking for. But that's the type of player again, right? That's what's needed here. And I maintain it's two or three of them, and I can really see it happening
Right.
especially if you can move out the $7.5 million you were talking about, between 5 million and 2.5 for Kubalik and 5 of Tarasenko. That you can bring in two or three guys like that. Like, heaven forbid,
Yeah.
even the Islander that was here. See, I'm doing it again, Steve. The Islander that was here on his PTO at the start of the season, Josh
Oh,
Bailey.
Josh Bailey.
Like, do you think Josh Bailey would have been okay in your bottom six right now if you'd
Yeah.
found a way to keep him? Who knows? He might have
Yeah.
been okay.
Yeah. I don't know what else Angus Crookshank has to do to get a permanent spot in Ottawa, because Crookshank is, he's doing the things that Parker Kelly does, for example. And he's also doing something that Parker Kelly never did, and that's light it up in the American Hockey League. So don't you want a guy who can do what Parker Kelly does, but produce a little more offense in the NHL? I guess Crookshank went to the All-Star game, continues to put up points. I'm not really getting why he's not part of the mix by now. Speaking of the American Hockey League, Tyler Boucher injured again. I don't know if you
Oh,
saw that the other night, but took a big hit, kind of a late one. Donovan Sabrango didn't like it. He came over and defended Tyler Boucher by allowing the guy who hit Boucher to apply his knuckles to his face on several occasions. It wasn't much of a fight, but I like the spirit of it. I like the notion of it. Your buddy's down, you go over and help him out and start a fight. But I mean, what else could go wrong for Tyler Boucher? And his offense is, it's just non-existent. You'd think a 10th overall draft pick would be in the American Hockey League, even if, I know he's missed a lot of hockey, but he's non-existent as far as offense goes. I don't want to call him a bust yet, but the guy can't catch a break.
and it's a shame too, because that's the type of player that you'd look to move if you're trying to make a deal and it's going to cost you a possible quote unquote prospect. A
Yeah,
former 10th overall pick would be a prospect, but this one just doesn't have any pedigree, just doesn't have any stats, nothing really, no record to speak of. It's for anybody to even look at him and say, hey, you know what, maybe we can make something out of that guy. Because the way he's playing, or the way he's not playing, he hasn't really had an opportunity to ever show anybody what he can do.
yeah.
And, like you say, you don't want to call him a bust yet, but come on, man. Eventually, he's got to either play or piss or get off the pot, right?
Yeah. It's going to be interesting going from the three teams that are worse than you in the standings to the next game when they're taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning down in Tampa on Monday night. But you know what? Who knows? Who knows with this team? Maybe they just play to the level of their opposition. One of those deals.
Yeah, but it's Tampa and Florida, right? They're back to back. Even I think it's even back to back days too, right? Florida, I think, is one of the top two or three teams in the East. They're right up there with Boston. This is a really good team. Tampa, you might catch them off guard. Maybe the boys get fired up. Maybe somebody says, "Look, we're going to Florida. We've been crap lately. We're not going down there to play golf. This is a business trip. We're going down there. We're going to take this serious, and we're going to step up. We're going to get things right back on track again." I really hope that's what's going to happen. And you know what? Historically speaking, that's probably exactly what's going to happen. They're now due for another 3-game win streak or 2 out of 3 or something, aren't they? That's the way it works usually.
Yeah. Well, it would be consistent with the sort of the team morale. It seems like when things are going well in that 4-game winning streak, they're just like, let's go, boys, and the emotions. I mean, it's just, but and then they get these lesser teams and they struggled with them, and now they've got these better teams. Maybe they show up for it, but it's like the old adage goes: whether it's an individual sport or a team one, never get too high, never get too low. Like the best teams are machine-like as far as their mental game goes. This team has not developed a mental game yet. They still ride the emotions, and sometimes that's a good thing for them, but most of the time it's a bad thing. Anyway, we'll wrap it up there, and I'll just wrap it up there. I don't know. I'll use tourists another day.
No, it's up to
All
you.
right. Yep. Edit point there, 27:30. Anyway, we'll wrap it up right there. And don't forget, our website is sensnationhockey.com, a commercial as well for the hockey news, thn.com/Ottawa. Got the game report up as just a few moments ago, which is why I made Greg wait around for 20 minutes, so I apologize for that. It's funny when you're writing game reports in the NHL, you obviously want to get your story out there as quickly as possible. So you've got 2/3 of it written, kind of, you're going to fill in the gaps there after that. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. But that game was 2-1 for the Sens. I started writing a story like with the headline Sens win and that kind of stuff. And then as soon as it started to tilt back the other way, I was like, oh, no, I have to rewrite this thing almost entirely. So anyway, my cross to
It
bear.
was nice to see Connor Bedard. He played well. He looked good.
Oh, man, every shift he was noticeable and doing things in his second game back. Yeah, this just in. He's pretty good. And even on, he got an assist on that first goal, but it was like everybody rushed to him as he's coming over the blue line with the puck. And so you had Zub basically stop. It's like, oh my God, I can't let that guy shoot. And Tkachuk came over and left his man. I can't let that guy shoot. And so now all of a sudden Shabbat's back there and 2 guys have blown to the net. And basically Bedard having a bit of vision, they goes, oh, okay, thanks. And just passed it past those guys. It's a 2-on-1 at that stage and tapped in for an easy goal by former Senator.
He's been off for a while, and it didn't look like he missed a single beat. Right?
No.
He had to run home and move the car for his sister. He got back to Chicago, and everything's good now.